For millions of people, Pocahontas is an absolute masterpiece of the Disney Renaissance. I mean, you've got the gorgeous animation, an epic romance, and of course that unforgettable music. But for many others, it's one of Disney's most problematic films, period. So, what's the real story here? All right, let's get into it.
And that's the question we're really going to unpack today. This actually comes straight from a Reddit thread where people were trying to figure out this exact same thing. Why does a film that so many people love on the surface stir up so much controversy?
Okay, so to really get the controversy, you first have to remember the film that so many people fell in love with. When Pocahontas came out in 1995, it wasn't just another kid's cartoon. Disney was treating this as a serious prestige project, something more adult, more epic than what came before.
And look, you can totally see why it was a hit. The artistry is just breathtaking. Critics were calling it technically impeccable. The romance felt more grown-up, way more dramatic than, say, The Little Mermaid. And then there was the music, which, wow, it scored Oscars, Grammys, Golden Globes, you name it. And for some people, it was a huge moment of seeing their culture on the big screen for the first time.
And yeah, one Reddit user kind of just nailed it. They said, look, I get all the criticism, but that music, especially Colors of the Wind, is just so powerful that it almost doesn't matter. It's an emotional anchor that has stuck with people for decades.
Okay, but for all that beauty, this is where the myth just completely crashes into a very harsh reality. See, the controversy was never really about the animation or the music. It's about the massive, massive gap between the Disney story and what actually happened. So, where does it all begin? Well, it starts with one huge, crucial change. Disney aged up its main character. A lot. The Pocahontas in the movie is a young woman, ready for this epic love story. The real Pocahontas, she was a kid, about 10 to 12 years old when she met the English settlers.
And John Smith, the guy she has this sweeping romance with in the movie, he was 27. So when you put a 27-year-old man with a 10-year-old girl, suddenly that whole Romeo and Juliet love story feels, well, it becomes deeply uncomfortable. And for a lot of people, it's just plain wrong.
And the inaccuracies don't even stop there. Her name wasn't even Pocahontas. That was just a childhood nickname. Her actual names, Eminute and Marioka, were basically erased to give her a simpler, easier identity for the movie. It's just another way her true story got changed.
And when you actually lay out the timeline of her real life, it's just devastating. Her real story wasn't a fairy tale, not even close. It was a life of being kidnapped, forced into a marriage, and used as a political symbol before she died from disease, thousands of miles from home, at just 20 or 21. The Disney version doesn't just simplify this, it erases it.
So you might be thinking, okay, it's a movie, they change stuff. But why does this change matter so much? Well, it's because these aren't just a few minor tweaks. Critics will tell you this is a textbook case of historical whitewashing.
So what is whitewashing? At its core, it's about cleaning up the past. Taking a story that's rooted in violence, conquest, and oppression, and just smoothing out all the rough edges to make it an entertaining family movie.
And someone on Reddit put this into, well, some extremely stark terms. And it's a really shocking comparison for sure. But it gets to the heart of why so many people feel it's just so wrong to romanticize a real, tragic historical figure from an oppressed group. Because by making this all about a love story, the movie gets to completely sidestep the brutal reality of what was actually happening. There's nothing about the diseases that wiped out indigenous people, nothing about the theft of land, or the violence that was just part of the whole colonial project.
And that whitewashing doesn't just affect your personal story. It completely changes how the film shows the main conflict, which leads us to the next big criticism.
So, the movie basically frames the whole conflict as a both sides problem. It suggests the English colonists and the Powhatan people were just equally intolerant of each other. You see it perfectly in the song Savages, where both groups sing almost the exact same hateful lyrics about the other. What this does is create a false sense of balance. It completely ignores the massive power difference between an invading force and the people who are trying to defend their own homes.
And this really gets to the core of the problem for a lot of people. Like this one person on Reddit said, the film basically makes it seem like the Native Americans were somehow wrong for being hostile to the people who were invading their land. It's a really misleading way to show what was going on.
Okay, so when you add it all up, the historical inaccuracies, the whitewashing, this whole both sides thing, what you're left with is a really, really complicated and problematic legacy.
one that absolutely continues to shape how people see this piece of history.
And this is the thing, right? This is where it really matters, because for so many kids, this movie is their first, and sometimes their only, introduction to this part of history. It creates this Disney version of the past, a simple, romantic story that ends up completely overshadowing the much darker, more complicated truth.
And get this, even the most famous, most beloved part of the movie, that song Colors of the Wind, has a complicated story. Its beautiful message was inspired by a very famous letter from Chief Seattle. The only problem? That letter isn't real. It was pretty much made up by a white screenwriter in the 1970s. So a song that's supposed to represent an indigenous worldview was actually based on something that wasn't authentic. But here's the final twist in all this. For all of these huge, undeniable problems, the film is also a landmark. It was Disney's first animated movie with a woman of color as the lead, and the voice actress, Irene Bedard, was the first non-white actor to voice a Disney princess. So you had this major step forward for representation sitting right next to all these major historical problems. It just makes the whole thing so messy.
So at the end of the day, the whole debate around Pocahontas really boils down to one big question. When we tell stories about the past, especially painful ones, where do we draw the line? At what point does artistic license turn into something that actually does harm? And that's a question that's worth wrestling with, long after the movie is over.